He came from the world they feared, yet brought a peace they didn't expect. But what happened after he discovered her with his father changed everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The harsh Dakota winter had begun to soften under the tentative warmth of early spring. Morning Star, son of the respected Sioux elder White Eagle, rode across the plains with the rising sun at his back. His father's blindness, the result of a fever 2 winters ago, had changed their lives profoundly. Once a revered tribal leader whose wisdom guided many decisions, White Eagle now sat in their teepee, his sightless eyes turned toward the sounds of the camp. Morning Star dismounted his paint horse at the edge of the settlement, his eyes scanning the horizon. The treaty with the white settlers was fragile at best. Though they had been allowed to maintain this territory, the encroachment continued unabated. Soon a trading post would open nearby, another step in the slow erasure of their way of life. "The buffalo are moving north earlier this year," said Running Fox, his childhood friend, approaching with a water skin. "Your father would have known what it meant." Morning Star nodded. "He still might. His eyes may have failed, but his spirit remains connected to the land." They walked together through the camp, acknowledging the elders with respectful nods. Children darted between teepees, their laughter a reminder of why they fought to preserve their ways. Morning Star carried the weight of future leadership. At 28 summers, he had proven himself a skilled hunter and warrior, but leadership required wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. "There's talk of white settlers moving closer," Running Fox said quietly. "Some of our young men want to drive them away. And risk breaking the treaty? We would lose everything," Morning Star replied, his jaw tightening. "My father always said wisdom must guide strength." As they approached his family's teepee, Morning Star heard something unexpected. Singing. A woman's voice, soft and clear, singing in English. He motioned for Running Fox to remain silent as he crept forward, hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. Peering through the entrance, Morning Star froze at the sight before him. A white woman with auburn hair sat beside his father, singing gently while grinding herbs in a small stone mortar. White Eagle's weathered face bore a smile Morning Star hadn't seen in months. The woman looked up, her song faltering as her green eyes met his. She appeared to be in her early 20s, dressed in a simple blue dress that had seen better days. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor. "Your father was alone, and I brought some herbs that might help ease his discomfort." White Eagle turned toward his son's presence. "Morning Star, this is Sarah Williams. She is the daughter of the new doctor at the fort. She knows the ways of healing." The new Morning Star studied her suspiciously. "How did you get into our camp?" "I asked permission from the women at the stream," she explained, her hands still working the mortar and pestle. "I've been learning about native healing plants. I hoped I might help." "And the singing?" Morning Star's voice remained hard. Sarah's cheeks colored. "Your father asked about our music. I offered to share a song." White Eagle raised his hand. "She has a gift, my son. Her voice carries healing. Do not chase away what the spirits have sent." Morning Star remained skeptical, but respected his father too much to argue. "The council gathers soon. You should leave." Sarah nodded, carefully placing the ground herbs in a small pouch, which she handed to White Eagle. "Mix this with hot water and drink it morning and night," she instructed gently. "I can return in a few days with more." "You would be welcome," White Eagle said before Morning Star could object. As Sarah gathered her small bag of supplies, Morning Star followed her outside. The spring sun illuminated her face, revealing a smattering of freckles across her nose and a small scar at her temple. "Why are you really here?" he asked bluntly when they were out of his father's hearing. Sarah met his gaze directly. "My father is the new doctor at Fort Randall. We arrived 3 weeks ago. I've always been interested in different healing traditions." She hesitated. "And I don't share the prejudices many at the fort hold. Your people bring disease, take our land, kill our buffalo, and now you want our medicine as well?" Morning Star's voice was low but edged with years of accumulated pain. "I don't want to take anything," Sarah replied steadily. "I want to learn and perhaps share what I know in return. Your father's eyes, the cloudiness suggests cataracts. In some cases, they can be treated." Morning Star's expression hardened. with white man's medicine that costs more than we could ever pay. Not all healing requires payment, Sarah said softly. Some is offered freely, as it should be. Before Morningstar could respond, Running Fox appeared at his side. The council waits, brother. With a final assessing look at the white woman, Morningstar nodded curtly. I'll escort you to the edge of camp. As they walked in silence, Morningstar noticed how several women nodded at Sarah, and even a few elders acknowledged her. Somehow, in his absence, this stranger had begun forming connections with his people. At the perimeter, Sarah turned to him. I'll return in 3 days with more medicine, if that's acceptable. My father welcomes you. That is enough, Morningstar replied, not committing his own approval. As he watched her walk away across the plain toward the distant fort, Morningstar felt an unsettling mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Her presence represented everything he had been raised to distrust, yet the gentleness she had shown his father could not be denied. That night, after the council meeting where tensions about the encroaching settlers had nearly erupted into arguments, Morningstar sat with his father outside their teepee under a blanket of stars. The white woman troubled you, White Eagle stated rather than asked. She is a stranger. Strangers bring change, and change has rarely favored our people, Morningstar replied. White Eagle's weathered hand found his son's shoulder. Not all change brings destruction, my son. Sometimes it brings new strength, new understanding. He paused, his sightless eyes turned toward the night sky. Her heart speaks truth, even if her people do not. Morningstar remained silent, watching the embers of their fire dance in the gentle spring breeze. His father had always possessed an uncanny ability to sense a person's character. If he trusted this Sarah Williams, perhaps Morningstar should reserve his judgment. But as he gazed toward the distant lights of the fort, Morningstar couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival marked the beginning of something that would forever alter the path of his life. Whether toward salvation or destruction remained to be seen. 3 days passed, and true to her word, Sarah returned to the Sioux camp. Morningstar had been hunting since dawn but returned to find her sitting outside his father's teepee, teaching 2 young girls how to weave small baskets from sweetgrass. Her auburn hair was braided simply, and she wore a practical brown skirt with a white blouse. She looked more comfortable than she had on her first visit. The girls were curious, she explained as Morningstar approached, her hands continuing to guide the children's fingers through the weaving pattern. Your mother, Swift Deer, said it was permissible. Morningstar's mother emerged from the teepee, carrying a wooden bowl of stewed rabbit and wild onions. She nodded at her son before offering the food to Sarah. You've been here since sunrise, Swift Deer said. You must eat to keep your strength. Sarah accepted the bowl with clear gratitude. Thank you. This smells wonderful. Morningstar watched this exchange with mild disbelief. His mother, always reserved around outsiders, seemed genuinely comfortable with the white woman. You've made yourself at home, he observed, setting down the pair of rabbits he'd caught. Your people have been kind, Sarah replied, taking a small bite of the stew. Your father's pain has lessened with the herbs, and his sleep is better. Swift Deer touched her son's arm. She has good hands and a respectful heart. White Eagle rests more peacefully than he has in many moons. The 2 young girls completed their small baskets and ran off giggling, leaving Sarah and Morningstar in an uncomfortable silence as Swift Deer returned to the teepee. I brought some new salve for your father's eyes, Sarah said finally, reaching into her leather satchel. It won't restore his sight, but it should soothe the discomfort. Morningstar sat across from her, studying her face openly. Why do you really come here? Few white women would venture alone into our camp. Sarah's green eyes met his without wavering. My mother died when I was young. My father raised me alongside his medical practice. I've assisted him since I was 12 years old. She set aside her empty bowl. When we were stationed in Arizona Territory, I met an Apache medicine woman who showed me how different plants could heal wounds that my father's medicines couldn't touch. And now you collect our knowledge as well? There was less accusation in his tone than there might have been days earlier. I learn, and I share what I know, Sarah corrected gently. Knowledge shouldn't be hoarded or stolen. It should be exchanged freely when it can help others. Morningstar considered her words. A noble sentiment, but one your people rarely practice. A shadow crossed Sarah's face. I know. I don't defend what's been done. I can only act according to my own conscience." Before Morning Star could respond, they heard shouting from the edge of the camp. Both rose quickly as Running Fox approached at a run. "Soldiers from the fort," he said breathlessly. "They're demanding to search the camp. They claim we stole horses." Morning Star's expression darkened. "Stay here," he instructed Sarah, but she was already gathering her things. "I'll come with you. Perhaps I can help." Together they hurried toward the commotion, where 5 mounted soldiers faced a growing group of Sioux men. The tension in the air was palpable. "We have authorization to search for stolen property," a sergeant was saying, his hand resting too casually on his holstered pistol. "Your authorization means nothing here," Morning Star stated firmly as he stepped forward. "No horses have been stolen." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe—" He broke off as he noticed Sarah. "Miss Williams, what in God's name are you doing here?" Sarah stepped forward. "I've been bringing medicine to the blind elder, Sergeant Miller. Doctor's orders." The sergeant looked skeptical. "Your father sent you alone among these savages?" Several of the Sioux men stepped forward at the insult, but Morning Star raised his hand to hold them back. "My father trusts my judgment," Sarah replied coldly. "And I trust these people far more than I trust men who make accusations without proof." 3 horses were taken from the paddock last night," another soldier interjected. "Then you should look elsewhere," Morning Star replied. "Our warriors have been hunting buffalo to the north. We have no need for your horses." The sergeant dismounted, his face flushed with anger. "We have tracks leading in this direction." "Then they continued past our camp," Morning Star countered. "Look around you. Do you see any new horses?" Sarah stepped between them. "Sergeant Miller, I've been here since sunrise. There are no new horses in this camp. If you force a search, you'll violate the treaty without cause." The standoff continued for several tense moments before the sergeant reluctantly remounted his horse. "This isn't over. If those horses are found here later, there will be consequences." As the soldiers rode away, Morning Star turned to Sarah with new respect. "You stood with us against your own people." "I stood for what was right," she corrected. "And they're not really my people any more than every Sioux is the same as you." The gathered Sioux began to disperse, many nodding appreciatively to Sarah as they passed. Running Fox approached, his expression troubled. "The stolen horses are likely with the crow hunting party that passed through yesterday," he said quietly to Morning Star. "They stopped for water beyond the ridge, but didn't enter our camp." Morning Star nodded grimly. "The actions of others often become our burden." Sarah looked between them. "You know who took the horses?" "We suspect," Morning Star replied carefully, "but it's not our place to speak for another tribe's actions." Sarah understood the complexity of his position. "I should return to the fort before my absence raises more questions." "I'll escort you part of the way," Morning Star offered, surprising himself. As they walked across the spring-green prairie, a comfortable silence settled between them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as meadowlarks called from the swaying grasses. "Your father speaks of you often," Sarah said finally. "He's very proud of the man you've become." Morning Star felt a familiar ache at the mention of his father's condition. "He was teaching me to lead our people before his eyes failed. Now much of that wisdom may die with him." "Perhaps not," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "His mind remains sharp, and his spirit strong. The knowledge is still there to be shared. It's difficult without sight. Many teachings require showing as well as telling." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "I've been thinking about that. Your father's blindness. I believe it's cataracts, a clouding of the lens in the eye. My father has performed operations to remove them." Morning Star's expression hardened. "White medicine has failed our people before. This is different," Sarah insisted. "The procedure is relatively simple for someone with my father's training. It doesn't always work, but when it does, sight can be restored." Hope flared briefly in Morning Star's chest before caution extinguished it. "And what would such an operation cost?" "Nothing," Sarah said firmly. "My father took an oath to heal the suffering. I would make sure he honors it." Morning Star studied her face, searching for deception, but finding only earnest determination. "I will speak with my father about this possibility. The decision must be his." They continued walking until they reached a small creek that marked the halfway point to the fort. I can continue alone from here, Sarah said. Will you permit me to return in 2 days? You no longer need my permission, Morningstar acknowledged. My people have accepted you. Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that made Morningstar suddenly aware of the quickening of his pulse. But your acceptance matters to me as well, she said softly. Before he could formulate a response, she crossed the creek and continued toward the fort without looking back. Morningstar remained there longer than necessary, watching her figure grow smaller in the distance, wondering at the strange mingling of cultures and destinies that had brought this woman into his life. That evening, as the camp settled into the rhythm of nightfall, Morningstar sat with White Eagle outside their teepee, the crackling fire illuminating their faces as he described Sarah's suggestion. An operation to remove the clouds from your eyes, Morningstar explained. She believes her father has the skill to restore your sight. White Eagle was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. This doctor, does Sarah speak of his success with such treatments? She says it doesn't always work, but when it does, sight returns. The old man nodded slowly. And you, my son? Do you trust this woman's words? Morningstar stared into the flames, confronting his own changing perceptions. I believe she speaks honestly. Whether her father's medicine will work for you, I cannot say. There was a time when you would have rejected any white man's medicine without consideration, White Eagle observed with a hint of amusement. Perhaps wisdom comes from unexpected sources, Morningstar replied, echoing his father's own frequent teaching. White Eagle reached out, his hand finding Morningstar's shoulder with unerring accuracy. Tomorrow, we will discuss this with the council elders. If they approve, I will try this operation. Not just for myself, but for our people. We must learn which parts of the changing world to embrace and which to resist. As the fire burned lower, stars appearing in brilliant clarity above the plains, Morningstar contemplated the possibilities that lay ahead. Both the hope of his father's restored sight and the growing connection with a woman who stood between two worlds, much as he himself increasingly did. The Council of Elders sat in a solemn circle inside the large ceremonial teepee. Morningstar had explained Sarah's proposal about the cataract operation, and now the tribal leaders debated among themselves while White Eagle listened silently, his unseeing eyes directed toward the central fire. How can we trust the White Doctor's medicine? Thunder Voice, one of the older warriors, questioned skeptically. Their ways are not our ways. Yet their guns and horses have become our ways, countered Tall Pine, a pragmatic elder. We take what is useful. Healing is different, argued Many Horses, the tribe's medicine man. The spirits guide our healing practices. The white man's medicine ignores the spirit. Morningstar had remained quiet, allowing the elders to express their views. But now he spoke. The spirits work in many forms. Perhaps they have sent this knowledge through Sarah as a gift. White Eagle finally raised his hand, and the discussion fell silent. I have listened to your wisdom, my brothers. This decision affects my eyes, but it concerns our whole tribe. For 2 years, I have lived in darkness, unable to fully serve our people as I once did. His voice, though aged, carried the authority of decades of respected leadership. If there is a chance to restore my sight, so I may better guide our tribe during these difficult times, I must try. After a moment of silence, Many Horses nodded reluctantly. I will prepare purification rituals before and after this white man's procedure. The spirits must protect you. With the council's blessing secured, Morningstar left to meet Sarah at their usual rendezvous point by the creek. The May sunshine warmed the earth, bringing forth wild flowers that dotted the prairie in bursts of yellow and purple. He spotted her sitting by the water, sketching in a small book. You have artistic talents as well as healing knowledge, Morningstar observed as he approached. Sarah looked up, smiling as she closed her sketchbook. Just recording some of the plants I found. How was your council meeting? The elders have agreed. My father wishes to try the operation. Sarah's face brightened. That's wonderful news. I spoke with my father and he's willing to perform the procedure. She hesitated. But there's a complication. My father says White Eagle should come to the fort where he has proper equipment. Morningstar's expression darkened immediately. That cannot happen. A Sioux elder entering the fort would be seen as surrender, not seeking healing. I understand, Sarah said quickly. I anticipated this concern. My father is willing to bring his instruments to the camp, but he's worried about having adequate light and clean conditions. Morningstar considered this problem. We could prepare a special teepee, open at the top for light with fresh hides and clean water. That might work, Sarah agreed. When could we do this? The medicine man requires 3 days for purification rituals. After that, we would be ready. Sarah nodded. I'll tell my father. He'll need to bring an assistant. Would that be acceptable? As long as they come unarmed and respect our ways, Morningstar stipulated. They began walking along the creek, planning the details of the procedure. The comfortable ease between them had grown over the weeks of Sarah's visits, though neither acknowledged the subtle shift in their relationship. There are risks, Sarah said seriously. My father wants everyone to understand that the operation may not succeed, and in rare cases, complications can occur. All healing carries risk, Morningstar replied. Our medicine man will be present to guide the spiritual aspects while your father tends to the physical. They stopped beneath a cottonwood tree, its new leaves rustling gently in the breeze. Morningstar noticed a small wildflower tucked into Sarah's braid, and found himself wondering who had placed it there, or if she had done so herself. Your people have accepted my presence more readily than I expected, Sarah observed. You have shown respect and brought healing. These things matter more than the color of your skin, Morningstar said. Then, with a hint of a smile, he added, though some still watch you with suspicion. Including you? Sarah asked, meeting his gaze directly. Morningstar considered his answer carefully. I watch you with curiosity. The honesty in his voice created a moment of tension between them, an unspoken recognition of the growing connection that neither was ready to name. Sarah broke the silence first. I should go. There's much to prepare. She hesitated, then added, Your father has been teaching me some of your language. He's a patient instructor. He was always the best teacher, Morningstar acknowledged, surprised by this revelation. What words have you learned? Mostly medicinal plants and simple greetings, Sarah replied. Then, with careful pronunciation, added, Pilamaya, thank you for trusting me with your father's care. The sound of his language on her lips affected Morningstar more deeply than he expected. Your pronunciation is not terrible, he said, the teasing tone covering his reaction. Sarah laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie. High praise indeed. I'll continue practicing. As they parted ways, Morningstar found himself looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. 3 days later, a small wagon approached the Sioux camp. Sarah sat beside her father, Dr. Williams, a dignified man with graying hair and the same green eyes as his daughter. Behind them rode a younger man whom Sarah introduced as Thomas, her father's medical assistant. The entire camp watched with mixed emotions as the white visitors were escorted to a specially prepared teepee. Many horses had completed the purification rituals, and White Eagle waited inside, ceremonially painted and spiritually prepared for the procedure. Dr. Williams spoke respectfully to Morningstar and the gathered elders. I understand the trust you're placing in me today. I promise to use all my skill to help your honored elder. Many horses approached with a bundle of smoldering herbs. You must be purified before you touch our chief's eyes. To his credit, Dr. Williams submitted to the ceremonial cleansing without hesitation. I welcome any additional protection for my patient, he said, earning reluctant nods of approval. Sarah helped arrange the surgical instruments while explaining each step of the procedure to Morningstar and the council members. My father will make a small cut in the eye to remove the clouded lens. White Eagle will need to remain very still. I have faced enemy arrows without flinching, White Eagle said calmly from where he sat. This will require less courage. Dr. Williams smiled at the old chief's composure. I've performed this operation many times, but I must be honest. The success varies with each patient. Some regain clear vision, others partial sight, and for some there is little improvement. Understanding the truth of what lies ahead is the beginning of wisdom, White Eagle replied. I am ready. Morningstar took his position at his father's side, holding his hand as Dr. Williams began the delicate procedure. Sarah assisted, handing instruments and providing water to cleanse the eye. The tension in the teepee was palpable, as tribal members whispered prayers and many horses softly chanted healing songs. The operation on the first eye took nearly an hour. When it was complete, Dr. Williams placed a bandage over it. "We'll need to wait until tomorrow to remove this covering," he explained. "The eye must heal undisturbed." "And the second eye?" Morningstar asked. "It's better to wait several weeks between eyes," Sarah explained. "That way, if there are any complications with the first, we won't risk both eyes." As Dr. Williams packed his instruments, he spoke quietly to Morningstar. "Your father is strong. I'm hopeful for a good outcome." The white visitors departed with a promise to return the following day. That night, Morningstar remained at his father's side, watching over him as White Eagle drifted in and out of sleep. "She has changed you, my son," White Eagle observed during one wakeful period. "Who has changed me?" Morningstar asked, though he knew whom his father meant. "The healer with sunrise in her hair," White Eagle replied with a knowing smile. "Your voice softens when you speak to her." Morningstar was grateful for the darkness that hid his expression. "She has shown kindness to our people when most whites show only contempt. There is more than gratitude in your heart," White Eagle said gently. "I may not see with my eyes, but I see with my spirit." Morningstar didn't deny it. "She walks between two worlds, as we increasingly must, but our paths lead in different directions." "Perhaps," White Eagle said thoughtfully, "or perhaps the Great Spirit has brought your paths together for reasons yet to be revealed." Morningstar sat in silence, contemplating his father's words as the night deepened around them. His feelings for Sarah had grown from suspicion to respect, and now to something more complicated, something that both troubled and exhilarated him. The next day, Sarah and her father returned to remove White Eagle's bandage. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath as Dr. Williams carefully unwound the covering. "Keep your eye closed until I tell you," the doctor instructed. He checked the healing, nodding with satisfaction. "Now very slowly open your eye." White Eagle's weathered face remained impassive as he gradually opened his eye. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Morningstar felt his hope beginning to fade. Then White Eagle raised his hand slowly, reaching toward his son's face. "There is light," he whispered, "and shapes." His fingers touched Morningstar's cheek. "I see the shadow of your face, my son. Not clearly, but more than darkness." A murmur of excitement spread through the gathered crowd. "Doctor," Williams smiled, clearly pleased. "This is very promising. The clarity may improve over the coming days as the eye continues to heal." White Eagle turned toward Sarah and her father. "You have brought light back into my world. Our people will not forget this kindness." As the day progressed, White Eagle's vision in the treated eye continued to improve. By evening, he could distinguish faces at close range and see the outlines of the teepees against the sunset. The camp celebrated with a feast in honor of the white healers, and for the first time, Dr. Williams and Thomas were welcomed as guests rather than outsiders. During the celebration, Morningstar found Sarah sitting alone at the edge of the firelight, watching the dancing with a thoughtful expression. "You've brought joy back to my father," Morningstar said as he sat beside her, "and hope to our people." "It was my father's skill," Sarah demurred. "It was your courage in building a bridge between our worlds," Morningstar corrected. "Few would have tried." Sarah turned to face him, her features softened by the firelight. "I've learned as much from your people as I've shared. More, perhaps." Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the perimeter of the camp. Morningstar rose quickly, his hand moving to his knife as Running Fox approached at a run. "Soldiers from the fort," he reported urgently. "Many of them with the new Indian agent. They demand to speak with you immediately." Morningstar's eyes met Sarah's, both realizing that their brief moment of harmony was about to be shattered by the harsh realities that divided their peoples. Morningstar strode toward the edge of the camp where a dozen mounted soldiers waited. At their center was a thin man in a dark suit, Henry Blackwood, the newly appointed Indian agent for the territory. Sarah and her father hurried to join Morningstar, their faces etched with concern. "What is the meaning of this intrusion during our celebration?" Morningstar demanded, his voice carrying across the tense silence that had fallen over the gathering. Agent Blackwood dismounted, his expression sour. The meaning, sir, is that we have reports of unauthorized white civilians in your camp, potentially in violation of treaty regulations. His gaze fell coldly on Sarah and Dr. Williams. Including these individuals, Dr. Williams stepped forward. I'm here in my capacity as a physician, treating a patient. There's no violation. Medical visits require proper authorization through my office, Blackwood countered, which you did not obtain. Sarah moved to stand beside Morningstar. There was no time for bureaucratic delays. The procedure was time-sensitive. Blackwood's thin lips curved into an unpleasant smile. Miss Williams, your reputation for native sympathies is well known. Your actions here undermine the authority of my office. His authority comes from a piece of paper, Morningstar stated firmly. Ours comes from generations on this land. Dr. Williams came to heal our elder, bringing sight back to one who had lived in darkness. A murmur ran through the gathered Sioux, and White Eagle himself emerged from the crowd, walking carefully with one eye still bandaged, but the other now able to discern the confrontation unfolding. I am the patient they came to treat, White Eagle announced, his dignity unmistakable despite his age. I invited them to our camp as honored healers. Blackwood seemed momentarily taken aback by the elder's presence, but quickly recovered. Nevertheless, procedures must be followed. Dr. Williams, you and your daughter will return to the fort immediately. There will be consequences for this unauthorized interaction. Morningstar stepped forward, his voice controlled but firm. They are our guests. They will leave when our celebration honoring them is complete, not before. The tension escalated as the soldiers shifted nervously, hands moving closer to their weapons. Dr. Williams placed a calming hand on Sarah's shoulder. We'll go, he said quietly. I won't have blood spilled over administrative disagreements. Sarah began to protest, but her father silenced her with a look. There are better ways to fight injustice than through confrontation, Sarah. Morningstar understood the doctor's wisdom, though it didn't ease the anger burning within him. We will escort you to your wagon, he said, signaling to several warriors who stepped forward. Blackwood smiled thinly at this apparent victory. The doctor and his assistant may gather their things. Miss Williams will return with me directly. What? Dr. Williams's composure broke. My daughter rides with me. Miss Williams requires a separate discussion regarding her ongoing unauthorized visits to this camp, Blackwood stated coldly. Sergeant, escort Miss Williams to my horse. As a soldier moved toward Sarah, Morningstar stepped between them. She leaves with her father or not at all. The standoff hung in the air for a breathless moment before being broken by an unexpected voice. Mr. Blackwood, called Captain James Reynolds, riding into the circle. His arrival surprised everyone, including the agent. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Captain Reynolds, the fort's second-in-command, was known for his fair dealings with the tribes. He dismounted and approached the group. Dr. Williams was acting under military medical authorization, which supersedes civilian Indian Bureau protocols in matters of urgent care, Reynolds stated firmly. I signed the authorization myself when Miss Williams explained the situation. Blackwood's face tightened with anger. I received no such documentation. An unfortunate clerical oversight, Reynolds replied smoothly. The paperwork will be on your desk tomorrow. In the meantime, I suggest we allow our medical personnel to complete their humanitarian mission without further interference. The captain's rank carried enough weight to make the agent hesitate. After a tense moment, Blackwood nodded stiffly. Very well. But I expect all three to return to the fort by noon tomorrow. This matter isn't closed. As the soldiers and agent departed, Captain Reynolds remained behind. Once they were out of earshot, he turned to Sarah with a stern expression. That was too close, Miss Williams. Blackwood has been looking for any excuse to restrict contact with the Sioux. He glanced at Morningstar. I meant what I said about the authorization. I'll create the paperwork tonight, but you're all walking a dangerous line. Thank you, James, Dr. Williams said sincerely. We owe you a debt. Reynolds shook his head. Just doing what's right. My grandfather was Cherokee. I understand better than most what these bureaucrats don't see. He tipped his hat to White Eagle. I'm glad the procedure was successful, Chief. I'll return tomorrow to escort our medical team back safely. As Reynolds rode away, the celebration resumed, though with a more subdued atmosphere. The confrontation had cast a shadow over the evening's joy, a stark reminder of the precarious position of the Sioux. Later, as the fires burned lower and most of the tribe had retired to their teepees, Morning Star found Sarah sitting alone by a small fire near the edge of the camp. "Captain Reynolds risked much to protect you," he observed as he sat beside her. Sarah nodded. "He's a good man. There are more like him than you might think." She stared into the flames. "But not enough to change what's happening." "And what is happening, Sarah?" Morning Star asked quietly. "Speak truly." She met his gaze, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "More settlers coming. More land being claimed. More pressure on Washington to solve the Indian problem." Her voice cracked slightly. "I wish I could stop it." "One person cannot turn a river," Morning Star said, echoing one of his father's teachings. "But many hands can dig a new channel." Sarah completed the saying, surprising him. "Your father taught me that one." They sat in companionable silence for a while, both aware that tomorrow would bring separation, with no certainty of when, or if, they would meet again. "What will happen when you return to the fort?" Morning Star finally asked. "Blackwood will try to restrict my movements, perhaps even press for my father and me to be reassigned," Sarah answered honestly. "But Captain Reynolds has influence, and my father's medical skills are too valuable for them to lose." Morning Star nodded, then spoke words he had been holding back. "These past weeks, you have become important to our people." He paused, gathering courage. "And to me." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes widening slightly at his admission. "Your friendship has come to mean more to me than I can express," she replied carefully. "Is it only friendship you feel?" Morning Star asked directly, the warrior in him unwilling to retreat from this most important confrontation. Sarah's cheeks flushed, visible even in the dim firelight. "No," she whispered. "It's more than friendship, but it seems impossible. Many things have seemed impossible that later came to pass," Morning Star said, thinking of his father's partially restored sight. "The world is changing around us. Perhaps some changes are for the better." He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The simple contact sent a current between them that needed no words to interpret. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," Sarah said softly, "but I know that meeting you has changed me forever." Morning Star gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Then we face tomorrow together, whatever it may bring." In the gentle light of the dying fire, Morning Star leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that bridged worlds, tentative at first, then deepening with the certainty of feelings too powerful to deny. When they parted, both knew that regardless of the obstacles ahead, they had found something rare and precious that would give them strength for the battles to come. The next morning, as promised, Captain Reynolds returned to escort the medical team back to the fort. Sarah embraced White Eagle, who could now see her face clearly with his healing eye. "You brought light to an old man's darkness," White Eagle said, holding her hands in his. "My son has chosen well." Sarah's surprise must have shown on her face, for White Eagle chuckled. "Little escapes a father's notice, even a half-blind one." Morning Star accompanied them to the creek that marked the boundary of Sioux territory. So, Williams and Thomas rode ahead with Captain Reynolds, tactfully giving Morning Star and Sarah a moment alone. "I'll return in 3 weeks for your father's second eye," Sarah promised. "Blackwood cannot prevent legitimate medical treatment." Morning Star nodded, though both knew the agent would try to find ways to interfere. "Until then, I will come to the meadow by the creek every 3 days at noon, if you can safely meet me there." Sarah smiled, her hand reaching up to touch the small leather pouch Morning Star had given her that morning, containing a carved wooden wolf, a symbol of loyalty and family among his people. "I'll come," she promised, "and I'll bring news of what's happening at the fort. There are others like Captain Reynolds who believe in peace between our peoples." Morning Star took her hands in his. "My father says that when 2 rivers join, they create a new path together. Perhaps that is what we must do. Find a new path that honors both our traditions while creating something new." Sarah's eyes shone with emotion. "I believe that's possible. Difficult, but possible." Their farewell kiss held both promise and determination, a sealed covenant to face whatever challenges arose with united hearts. As Morning Star watched Sarah ride away, he felt not the despair of separation, but the strength of connection. Something profound had changed within him, and within his understanding of the future. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges from both worlds. But for the first time, he saw possibility rather than just threat in the changes coming to the plains. 1 month later, White Eagle stood on a hilltop overlooking the plains, his vision now restored in both eyes. Beside him stood Morning Star and Sarah, their hands joined in the sight of both their peoples. Dr. Williams, Captain Reynolds, and a small delegation from the fort stood alongside the Sioux Council in a ceremony that symbolized a fragile but hopeful new beginning. Captain Reynolds had been promoted to commanding officer after the previous commander was reassigned, due in part to his mishandling of relations with the local tribes. Agent Blackwood's